This is our world now, but who sacrificed what to get us here? Women have been a part of every major war in this country, but never received the proper level of recognition till the creation of the WAC, Women's Army Corps, in 1943. The creation of the WAC begins in 1942 with the creation of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, or WAAC. With war looming, U.S. Representative Edith Nourse Rogers of Massachusetts introduced a bill for the creation of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps in May 1941. Having been a witness to the status of women in World War I, Rogers vowed that if American women served in support of the Army, they would do so with all the rights and benefits afforded to male soldiers. When the bill was first introduced in 1941, it was tossed aside, but then again spurred on by the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. Congress approved the creation of the WAAC May 14, 1942. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the bill into law May 15th, and on May 16th, Ovida Culp Hobby was sworn in as the first director. WAAC was established for the purpose of making available to the national defense the knowledge, skill, and special training of women of the nation. Hobby immediately began organizing the WAAC recruiting drive and training centers. Fort Des Moines in Iowa was selected as the site of the first WAAC training center. Over 35,000 women from all over the country applied for less than 1,000 anticipated positions. The first women arrived at the first WAAC training center at Fort Des Moines, Iowa, July 20, 1942. Among them were 125 enlisted women and 440 officer candidates, 40 of whom were black, who had been selected to attend the WAAC Officer Candidate School, or OCS. Their arrival and subsequent training brought considerable public interest surrounding civil rights, as this corps presented the biggest opportunity to test integration in the Army. After OCS, black officers and white officers were segregated, and after training, the WAAC officer or enlisted person was assigned to a 150 women table of organization company, which only had spaces for clerks, typists, drivers, cooks, and unit cater. Women primarily worked in 4 fields: baking, clerical, driving, and medical. Within 1 year of the WAC establishment, over 400 jobs were open to women. Due to the WAAC law not making women an integral part of the Army, they could not be governed by Army regulations or the Articles of War. Stateside, enlisted women and men received the same basic rate of pay. However, women could not receive overseas pay and were ineligible for government life insurance. If they were killed, their parents could not collect the death gratuity. In the beginning, WAAC exceeded all its recruiting goals, but by June 1943, recruiting efforts had fallen. Higher-paying jobs in civilian industry, unequal benefits with men, and attitudes within the Army itself, which had existed as an overwhelmingly male institution from the beginning, were all factors of the WAAC's downfall. In January 1943, U.S. Representative Edith Nourse Rogers of Massachusetts introduced identical bills in both houses of Congress to permit the enlistment and commissioning of women in the Army of the United States, or Reserve Forces, as opposed to regular enlistments in the U.S. Army. This would drop the auxiliary status of the WAAC and allow women to serve overseas and free a man to fight. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed into legislation July 1, 1943, which changed the name of the Corps to the Women's Army Corps and made it part of the Army of the United States. This gave women all of the rank, privileges, and benefits of their male counterparts. Women were recruited from all 50 states and its territories. Obviously, if men objected to their girlfriends, wives, and daughters enlisting, the women would feel great conflict about joining the military. Another group against women serving in the Army was the Army itself, or at least some of the members. According to a woman who served as a USO Club hostess, the feeling of men in the camps was 99% against women going into the Army. Some personnel expressed concern that men would not be able to function properly fighting alongside women. The possibility that male soldiers might seek to defend and protect military women instead of carrying out their assigned missions was cited by military experts as primary examples of potential dangers in incorporating women fully into the military structure. Some officers seemed to think including females in the Army was just a waste of time. Colonel Adler, civilian aide to the Secretary of War, suggested that they concentrate their energies first on tremendously important matter of building up morale, in which he declared women were far more important and effective than men. Colonel McCoskrie, who later would serve as the commandant of the WAAC training center at Fort Des Moines, Iowa, was openly skeptical. He said, "Like most of my contemporaries, I wasn't much impressed by the thought of women in uniform. We had a war to fight, and a war was a man's business. Women would only clutter it up." General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied forces in Europe, was violently against the idea of WAC at first. He predicted tremendous difficulties in their service. Even though Representative Rogers wanted the Women's Corps to be part of the Army so that women could be given equal pay, pension, and disability benefits, the War Department was very unwilling to have these women as part of the Army. Still, women prevailed. A WAC recruiting campaign on the island of Puerto Rico resulted in 200 women being selected out of a pool of 1,500. Entrance requirements were rigorous, with each woman being required to pass an exam which was entirely in English. Those selected represented many professions: teachers, office workers, translators, and even a lawyer. Women's Army Corps also recruited Nisei women, second-generation Japanese-American women. Several hundred were selected, and a number of those were training in linguistics at the Military Intelligence Service Language School at Fort Snelling, Maine. Other Nisei WACs received more traditional training in clerical, medical, and supply positions. Eventually, some Nisei WACs found themselves serving as translators and office workers at General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters in Tokyo. During World War II, members of WAC were assigned to the Army Air Forces, Army Ground Forces, and Army Service Forces. Comprised of 9 service commands, the Military District of Washington, and the Technical Services. At first, job opportunities were limited, but soon wide arrays of positions were available to women. Never before had women, with the exception of nurses, served within the ranks of the U.S. Army. With the establishment of the WACs, more than 150,000 did so. Generals within the Army itself said it best.
Ladies and gentlemen, General Marshall.
The Women's Army Corps is an integral part of the Army of the United States, and its members, who are soldiers in every sense of the word, perform a full military part in this war. There are hundreds of important Army jobs which women can perform as effectively as men. In fact, we find that they can do some of these jobs much better than the men. As more and more American soldiers engage the enemy in combat, women must replace them at overseas bases and at posts in this country.
Because of women's great significance as part of the WAC, in 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed into law the Women's Armed Services Integration Act. This enabled women to serve as permanent regular members of not only the armed forces, but the Navy, Marine Corps, and the Air Force. Though the number of women who could serve was limited to 2% of total forces in each branch, women had come a long way from being expected to work at home. Desiring to protect their country wasn't a dream anymore. Because of the Women's Army Corps, this was reality. Now the United States isn't just a man's country, but a women's as well.